All right, welcome to Module 1, Web Project Kickoff and Tools. Now, this is where we're going to set the foundation for everything that we're going to be doing in this course. I'm your professor, Dr. Lisa English Dowdell. Now, in this lecture, I want to do three things. I want to first explain the difference between static and dynamic websites. Second, I want to give you sort of a high-level overview of the course project, and then I want to explain how tools like GitHub are going to fit into this process. Now, this is not a deep technical lecture. It's about really understanding like the big picture before we actually get started building. Now let's start off with a really important concept that you'll hear all semester, static websites versus dynamic websites. Now, a static website is exactly, what it sounds like. The content is fixed. It's what the developer writes, and then that's what the user sees. Static sites, they're built using things like HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, JavaScript, or even jQuery. They don't talk to the database. They don't talk to a database. They don't store user data on a server or anything like that. They don't change, unless you, the developer, actually changes the code. Now, examples of like a static site might be like, you might have some marketing sites that would use that. Maybe even like a digital resume, maybe a restaurant's basic homepage or something like that, or a portfolio website that you might have, or even maybe an informational non-profit website. Again, it doesn't change unless the developer manually edits it. Now, here's the thing, static doesn't mean simple or unprofessional. Many real businesses use static sites because, they're fast to create, they're secure, and they're easy to deploy. Now, a dynamic website, it goes a little further. A dynamic site uses server-side code like PHP and a database like MySQL. And what this does is it allows the site to store user information. It allows it to retrieve data, say from a database, and display like different content based on like the user's actions. So, for example, an example of like a dynamic website might be like if you have like a contact form that actually saves the user's submission, when they press the submit button, or a volunteer sign up that stores data, or even like maybe an admin page that displays like stored records or something like that. Other examples of like dynamic sites are like Facebook. Facebook is like a dynamic site. Amazon, or maybe even like if you've ever seen a blog where like the content changes based on the user behavior or maybe the database records. Now, dynamic sites, they're more powerful, okay, but they're also a little bit more complex to do. Now, here's the important takeaway that I want you to take away from this is that most real world projects, they'll start as like static prototypes. And then what happens is they evolve into like dynamic systems. And that's what we're going to be doing in this course. Your project is going to start off as a static site because it's going to allow you to focus more on the design, the structure, and the accessibility. And then we're going to deploy, it allows us to deploy and test it, quickly using like the GitHub pages. And then, we can learn about version control without really having that complex back-end code. And then as you progress within this course, within web development, then what you're going to do is you're going to be building dynamic features. But just remember that every great site starts with a well-planned static version. So that's the approach that we're going to take. Now let's talk about GitHub. And this is just not where your files live. This is going to enable like version control. It provides like a deployment platform, GitHub pages, that's what we're going to be using. And it's also like a portfolio builder. Now, when we talk about version control allows you to track the changes. It allows you to collaborate and then undo like any mistakes that you might have made. Like if you've ever made a mistake and like wished for a previous version, version control is going to be like your best friend for that. And then you're going to create a repository, and you're going to either upload your files directly or you're going to sync them through, like if you decide to use Visual Studio Code for this class. Either approach is going to be fine for this project or for your project. Now, again, like I said, we're going to be using this to publish our static websites. And so we're going to be using GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages, it allows you to publish your static website live to the web, and it's free. Now, you don't need like a domain or you don't need any kind of web hosting to subscribe to, just a well-planned repo and a published HTML file. Now, once the GitHub Pages is enabled, anybody can view your work through the URL. Like you'll have a URL that'll have like maybe your name.github.io and then whatever the name of your website is. And this is going to be a huge benefit because it's going to allow you to be able to show your work to like your classmates, or like if you decided to use it for your portfolio or something like that, it allows you to publicly show your website rather than just being on your computer. And this also is going to allow you to practice the deployment workflow that we use in professional environments. And I've got a lot of write-up on this in the course room as far as instructions of how you would be going in and setting up like your GitHub repo, your repository, and then how you would go in and configure your GitHub pages. So make sure that you take a look at that. So now let's talk about the course project at a high level. Now in this class, you're going to be taking on the role of a web developer that's going to be hired to build a website for a nonprofit organization. Now the nonprofit, it's fictional, but the process is going to be very real. Now, over the semester, you're going to build two versions of the same website. You're going to build a static version. Remember, we talked about what a static version is. And then you're going to be building a dynamic version. Now, in the first half of the course, you're going to focus on planning the site, designing the layout, building the front end using HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, and jQuery. And this version is going to be published using your GitHub Pages, and it represents a fully functional static prototype. Okay, so that's the first half of the class. So that's why it's important to go ahead and start setting up like your GitHub, and you're going to be doing that this week. Now in the second half of the course, you're going to take that same project, that same website, and you're going to extend it into a dynamic website. And this means you're going to be adding PHP, you're going to be connecting to a MySQL database, you're going to be processing form submissions, and you're going to be displaying stored data. Now this version is going to be hosted on a live server environment. Right now I'm looking at SiteGround for that, but that may change in the next few weeks. And I'll let you know which hosting environment we're going to be using. Now this two-phase approach, it mirrors how real development teams work. You know, the design comes first, and then you validate the front end, and then you start adding back end functionality. Now, I'm not going to go through every requirement right now. That's what the final website project brief is for. So you'll find that document in the course information section of your Canvas course room. But that brief basically lays out like what the project objectives are, what your weekly or bi-weekly, I should say, milestones are, your technical requirements, any technical requirements that are needed for the project, and exactly what you're going to be submitting at each stage. Now, the way that this course is broken down, modules usually run like every couple of weeks. They contain like 2 weeks of work, and so like for the first module, as far as your project, you're going to be doing the planning and your GitHub setup. During the second week, you're going to be creating the scaffold, which is just your wireframe, and then your use cases. In the third module, you're going to be creating responsive layout. We're going to be using Bootstrap for that, and we'll get into that. And then the fourth module, this is where you're going to kind of showcase to me what you've got so far. And you're going to also be adding in some dynamic scripting using jQuery. Then in module 5, this is really when we run into more of creating a dynamic website, because you're going to get introduced to PHP scripting and coding. Then in module 6, you're going to actually be working with the database MySQL and connect it to your PHP. Module 7, you're going to be doing like some form processing using PHP and also displaying data that's in that database. And then finally, for the last module, which is your final, this is where you actually will conclude everything and have like your final showcase. Now, you should look at that brief, become familiar with it, and read it carefully, and then come back to it often during the course, so that you understand what's the requirements, how you're going to be graded as far as your project. Now, throughout this course, you're going to work with a full web development stack. So let's talk about, let's walk through each of the pieces of that stack. So first, there's HTML, hypertext markup language, and this is the structure of your website. This is what's going to define the content on the page, such as like headings, paragraphs, links, and images. Then you're going to have CSS, cascading style sheets, and this is what controls the appearance of your site. It allows you to style colors, fonts, layouts, and spacing, of different elements on your website. Then you've got JavaScript. Now, this is the language that makes your site interactive. It controls behaviors like drop downs, modals, sliders, even some form validation. And this is what we call client-side scripting, because it's done within the browser. It doesn't have to do this on the server. We're also including in this stack, development stack, Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a CSS framework that allows you to create responsive and mobile-friendly designs a lot quicker. It includes using like a grid system, a lot of predefined components, and utility classes. Then we have PHP, hypertext preprocessor. Now, this is a server-side scripting language, and this is going to be used to build those different dynamic features like contact forms, that actually processes the form, your login systems, and even like your database queries. And then we're going to be using MySQL, and MySQL is a relational database management system that's used to store and retrieve data for your site. So you're going to use this alongside PHP to build like data-driven functionality. Now, these tools combine to give you control over the entire user experience, from what users see to how they interact with your website to how the data flows behind the scenes. Okay, so now to recap, so you've learned the difference between static and dynamic websites, because these are the two phases, that we're going to be using as far as structuring your course project. And you know where to find full project details in Canvas. Like I said, go under the course information. You'll see the brief there. Now, right now, your job is not to be perfect. Your job is to get set up, understand the project, and then start planning. Now, we'll build this step by step, and you're not going to be doing all of this at once. So, I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed or anything like that. Okay. Okay, so for this first module, you're going to have 2 assignments to complete. Remember what I said, most modules are going to consist of a 2-week period. So you've got some time to do this, but please don't procrastinate. Okay, now the first assignment is defining your nonprofit website concept and setting up your project workspace using GitHub. So you're going to configure your GitHub pages where you're going to publish like your simple homepage as index.html. Remember, this homepage file needs to be named index.html exactly. Now, there are step-by-step instructions provided in the course room to be able to complete this assignment, along with some resources and some videos that you can watch as well. Now, the second assignment is to create a wireframe layout for your homepage of your nonprofit using either mockups or a similar tool. And this wireframe is going to help you plan the design and the navigation structure for your web page. So in the module overview, I've provided several resources again to help you even with this assignment, various different videos for using mockups, or if you decide to use one of the other tools, you can use those, and I've got resources for that, depending on whatever tool that you decide to use. Now remember, if you run into any issues working with Module 1, please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, let me know, whatever issues that you have, so that we can work through it, so that you can stay on course. It's going to be very important because this is a course-based, a project-based course, that you stay on, you're turning in your assignments on time, you're staying on a schedule, because if once you get behind, it's kind of going to be hard to kind of catch up. So I want you to hear, I do have some information about that also in the course room, but make sure that if you haven't taken a look and gone through everything that's in the course information section, that you take the time to do that. Other than that, have a good 2 weeks, and let me know if you run into any issues.